an African, named Lewis, was seized one dark night by two watermen employed by the person who claimed the Negro as his property, dragged into the water, hoisted into a boat, where he was gagged, and his limbs were tied. And then rowing down river, they put him on board a ship bound for Jamaica, where he was to be sold for a slave upon his arrival in the island. The cries of the poor Negro had, however, attracted the attention of some neighbors, one of whom proceeded direct to Mr. Granville Sharp, now known as the Negro's friend, and informed him of the outrage. Sharp immediately got a warrant to bring back Lewis, and he proceeded to Gravesend, but on arrival there the ship had sailed for the Downs. A writ of habeas corpus was obtained, sent down to Spithead, and before the ship could leave the shores of England the writ was served. The slave was found chained to the mainmast bathed in tears, casting mournful looks on the land from which he was about to be torn. He was immediately liberated, brought back to London, and a warrant was issued against the author of the outrage. The promptitude of head, heart, and hand, displayed by Mr. Sharp in this transaction could scarcely have been surpassed, and yet he accused himself of slowness. The case was tried before Lord Mansfield, whose opinion, it will be remembered, had already been expressed as decidedly opposed to that entertained by Granville Sharp. The judge, however, avoided bringing the question to an issue, or offering any opinion on the legal question as to the slave's personal liberty or otherwise, but discharged the Negro, because the defendant could bring no evidence that Lewis was even nominally his property. The question of the personal liberty of the Negro in England was therefore still undecided. But in the meantime Mr. Sharp continued steady in his benevolent course, and by his indefatigable exertions and promptitude of action, many more were added to the list of the rescued. At length the important case of James Somerset occurred. A case which is said to have been selected, at the mutual desire of Lord Mansfield and Mr. Sharp, in order to bring the great question involved to a clear legal issue. Somerset had been brought to England by his master, and left there. Afterwards his master sought to apprehend him and sent him off to Jamaica, for sale. Mr. Sharp, as usual, at once took the Negro's case in hand, and employed counsel to defend him. Lord Mansfield intimated that the case was of such general concern, that he should take the opinion of all the judges upon it. Mr. Sharp now felt that he would have to contend with all the force that could be brought against him, but his resolution was in no wise shaken. Fortunately for him, in this severe struggle, his exertions had already begun to tell, increasing interest was taken in the question, and many eminent legal gentlemen openly declared themselves to be upon his side. The cause of personal liberty, now at stake, was fairly tried before Lord Mansfield, assisted by the three justices, and tried on the broad principle of the essential and constitutional right of every man in England to the liberty of his person, unless forfeited by the law. It is unnecessary here to enter into any account of this great trial. The arguments extended to a great length, the cause being carried over to another term, when it was adjourned and re-adjourned, but at length judgment was given by Lord Mansfield, in whose powerful mind so gradual a change had been worked by the arguments of counsel, based mainly on Granville Sharp's tract, that he now declared the court to be so clearly of one opinion, that there was no necessity for referring the case to the 12 judges. He then declared that the claim of slavery never can be supported, that the power claimed never was in use in England, nor acknowledged by the law. Therefore the man James Somerset must be discharged. By securing this judgment Granville Sharp effectually abolished the slave trade until then carried on openly in the streets of Liverpool and London. But he also firmly established the glorious axiom, that as soon as any slave sets his foot on English ground, that moment he becomes free. And there can be no doubt that this great decision of Lord Mansfield was mainly owing to Mr. Sharp's firm, resolute, and intrepid prosecution of the cause from the beginning to the end. It is unnecessary further to follow the career of Granville Sharp. He continued to labor indefatigably in all good works. He was instrumental in founding the colony of Sierra Leone as an asylum for rescued Negroes. He labored to ameliorate the condition of the native Indians in the American colonies. He agitated the enlargement and extension of the political rights of the English people, and endeavored to effect the abolition of the impressment of seamen. Granville held that the British seaman, as well as the African Negro, was entitled to the protection of the law, and that the fact of his choosing a seafaring life did not in any way cancel his rights and privileges as an Englishman, first amongst which he ranked personal freedom. Mr. Sharp also labored, but ineffectually, to restore amity between England and her colonies in America. And when the fratricidal war of the American Revolution was entered on, his sense of integrity was so scrupulous that, resolving not in any way to be concerned in so unnatural a business, he resigned his situation at the Ordnance Office. To the last he held to the great object of his life, the abolition of slavery. To carry on this work, and organize the efforts of the growing Friends of the Cause, the Society for the Abolition of Slavery was founded, and new men, inspired by Sharp's example and zeal, sprang forward to help him. His energy became theirs, and the self-sacrificing zeal in which he had so long labored single-handed, became at length transfused into the nation itself. His mantle fell upon Clarkson, upon Wilberforce, upon Brougham, and upon Buxton, who labored as he had done, with like energy and steadfastness of purpose, until at length slavery was abolished throughout the British dominions. But though the names last mentioned may be more frequently identified with the triumph of this great cause, the chief merit unquestionably belongs to Granville Sharp. He was encouraged by none of the world's uses when he entered upon his work. He stood alone, opposed to the opinion of the ablest lawyers and the most rooted prejudices of the times. And alone he fought out, by his single exertions, and at his individual expense, the most memorable battle for the Constitution of this country and the liberties of British subjects, of which modern times afford a record. What followed was mainly the consequence of his indefatigable constancy. He lighted the torch which kindled other minds, and it was handed on until the illumination became complete.